Salve omnes, and welcome back. In this video, we're going to be reading through Caesar Book 5, chapters 45 and 46, following the AP Latin syllabus. As always, before we begin, let's go over our color coding. Red indicates the subjects of our sentences. Green is used to indicate our verbs. And blue, which we don't see here unfortunately, is used to indicate direct objects. Likewise, anything showing up in bold type is the main thought of the sentence, and anything not in bold type is somehow subordinate to it. And so with that out of the way, let's dive in, shall we? So now, after the episode with Pullo and Varenus, we return to the main flow of the battle between Cicero and the Gauls, and we can see that things are getting much more serious and grave for the Romans. So we start off here in chapter 45 with quanto erat. And just a note before we dive into translating, we see that this quanto here is going to be echoed down here by tanto. These are correlative expressions, basically something like as much as this, so much that. That's basically the idea. As much as this, so much of that. Okay, so we just have to keep this relationship in our mind as we read, and then we'll see what the relationship is. So let's consider then how we start off. Let's leave this quanto here. We see that quanto is ablative. We'll come back to why in a moment. Let's see what's going on. Well, as the days were going on in dies, things were, we might say, or the battle was more serious and more harsh, or worse, we might say. And particularly because and then we get this ablative absolute right here, all right, magna parte militum confecta vulneribus. It actually has an ablative of means with vulneribus right here. With a great part of the soldiers having been affected or incapacitated by wounds. So we see that vulneribus here, as an ablative of means, is working with the participle confecta, which is in the ablative absolute. So a great part of the soldiers have been overwhelmed by wounds, so the situation, the res, right, the situation has come, per venerat, has come down, we might say, to a very small number of defenders, all right, to a paucitatem defensorum. Partitive genitive here because of paucitatem. So that's the situation that we're in. Now, let's come back to this quanto-tanto relationship. Let's talk briefly about the ablativeness of quanto and tanto. These are ablatives of degree of difference. We've seen that before, showing up with these comparative adjectives. So when we translate it, it winds up being something like, as the battle was so much more serious and worse as the days went on, that much more frequently, or frequent because it is an adjective, letters and messages, and then let's just take a quick jaunt down here, were sent to Caesar. So basically the idea is as the battle gets more grave and worse for our men, letters are sent to Caesar that much more frequently. Literally, creber means something like thick, but it doesn't mean thick as in width or density. It means thick as in thick with frequency. So the idea here is that as things get progressively worse, the letters that get sent are progressively more frequent. Letters are sent more frequently to Caesar. However, all right, things don't go very well, as we can see right here. Quorum, this would be, technically it's the nuntii, all right, because once again the relative pronoun here is triggering off of the closest word that we see it could be agreeing with, which would be the nuntii. All right, but the whole idea here is that the people who were carrying the letters, right, letters and messengers really, because this is masculine, nuntii, of whom, all right, that would be the messengers, the people carrying the letters, of whom the ones that were caught, all right, deprehensa, like apprehensa, the ones that were caught, or the part of them that were caught, another partitive genitive, in the sight of our soldiers, were killed, or was killed, but the sense of it is plural, were killed with torture. Cum cruciatu, with torture. So that's what's happening as the soldiers get more desperate. They keep sending more letters, but the men are getting caught or not getting out at all. And the ones who are caught are tortured and killed in front of our soldiers. Nostrorum militum, by the way, this genitive here with conspectu, within the sight of our soldiers, this is a subjective genitive, nostrorum militum, because the soldiers are the ones watching as the messengers are tortured and killed. All right. Happily, however, we see that a solution presents itself. There was someone, or a person, within, this is an adverb, all right, intus, within, so we would say there was someone among the nervii. That's how we would say that in English. Named Vertico. All right, Vertico by name, we would say. This is an ablative of respect. All right, nomine, ablative of respect. Vertico is not ablative, by the way. This is his actual name. This is nominative. We know that he was born something like of an honorable station. So he wasn't a slave. He was a freeborn citizen, a freeborn Nervian, who, prima obsidione, so this is not from the first siege, but rather from the beginning of the siege, is what we would say in English. The way that prima works here with the noun is very much like the way media works in a phrase like media nox. We don't say the middle night, we say the middle of the night, so it's the same thing happening here. He had fled, pluperfect tense, he had fled to Cicero and professed his faith to him. So he had sworn allegiance to him, all right? This AE dative here is just an indirect object. All right, hic, this would be our man Vertico. He persuaded his slave. Notice the servo is in the dative but indicated as our object because persuaded, of course, as we know, wants a dative as an object. He persuaded his slave by means of, and these ablatives right here, notice how primiis goes with magnis, but it's kind of split by the persuaded. He persuaded his slave by means of the promise of freedom, or the hope of freedom, and great rewards, right? So money. Libertatis here, briefly, the hope of freedom, that would be the objective genitive, all right, because it's what the slave is hoping for. That, and then this is technically it's an indirect command because of persuadet, that he should carry letters to Caesar. All right, continuing on. Ille, this would be our slave friend whose name we do not know. It wasn't recorded by Caesar. He, this guy, carries, has would be understood the literas. He carries these letters that are tied in jaculo. Right, so they are tied on a javelin. Right, they're tied, we would say, to a javelin, but they are tied onto his spear. And Gallus inter Gallos, lovely phrase right there, a Gaul among Gauls. Sine ulla suspicione versatus, this participle going with Gallus. This is a deponent verb, versor, which is why when we translate it, we will do it actively because of deponent, perfect active participle. Having gone through or having traveled without any suspicion, he came to Caesar, right? Ille is still the subject. Ille Gallus, right, is the subject of pervenit. He came to Caesar. And now we're going to see just how fast Caesar can actually go. By this, now this AO right here, this could be the man, it could be the message. I mean, it's probably the slave because it works as an ablative of agent with cognoscitur. So it was learned from this slave. But even then, when we translate it, we would say from this slave. We wouldn't say it was learned by this slave. That doesn't make sense. It was learned by Caesar. But the AO is almost certainly the slave, given its proximity in our narrative to the slave, who was the last person we were talking about. So an ablative of agent, from him, it was learned. Notice we don't say Caesar learned. We say it was learned, an impersonal passive construction. About the dangers, we would say to Cicero and to the legion, but Latin uses the genitives, cicerones legiones, right, of the danger for Cicero and the legion. So, What does Caesar do? He moves very, very quickly, as always. So, Caesar, first time he's been the subject in a while. Ablative absolute starting us off. Notice there is an ablative absolute being described with a time construction here. With the letters having been received at about the 11th hour of the day. So this is practically the end of the day, because we remember that a Roman day is divided into only 12 hours. Immediately, a message or a messenger, it's up to you, into the territory of the Bellovaci to Marcus Crassus the quaestor he sends. Again, notice these present tense verbs. If you wanted to, you could read these as perfect tense. He sent. It's totally fine. Just stay with it. Whose winter camp, this would be Crassus, obviously, whose winter camp was from him, this Ao is Caesar, 25 miles away. All right, 25 miles away. Just a note, milia passuum. Passuum is genitive, but milia is accusative, technically, for extent of space, all right, or distance. And we see there's no connector here, a bit of asyndeton. He orders the legion to depart. And the reason legionem is indicated here as the object is because iubet, the verb iubere, does not often begin indirect speech. It simply takes an accusative object and an infinitive of the thing to be done. So he orders the legion to set out in the middle of the night and quickly to come to him. This say is Caesar as well. So here Caesar was Ao, probably because he was so far down in the subordinate phrases, but here Caesar is say, the reflexive, which really he should be the entire time. Things don't get much simpler than this, do they? Crassus departed with the message. The idea here, of course, is that Crassus departed as soon as he received the message, is, understood. All right, continuing on. Caesar is still the subject here. Now we go back. Crassus has done his business. He's left. He's departed. We return, just in the way that we understand things, to Caesar being the subject. And another, we need to understand our context, message or messenger, to Gaius Fabius the legate, Caesar sends. And then here we see an ut clause. So now we have an indirect command telling him to, right? Fabius is the understood subject of aducat, telling him to bring his legion into the territory of the Atrebates, where, now this qua right here is referring in sense to the fines Atrebatium, but it's just being used here in the simple feminine ablative singular to mean where, in what place. Where he knew, this would be Caesar, that, so here we go into indirect statement, the journey would have to be made by him. We see the faciendum, we see the gerundive, we know that there is an essay missing because we are in indirect speech, so we have a passive periphrastic construction here. The journey must be made with the typical dative of agent, that we use with passive periphrastic constructions. So we would simply say in English, where Caesar knew that he would have to journey, is how we would read that in English. Latin, of course, does it the other way around, where he knew that the journey would have to be made by him. All right, 2 letters down, here's a 3rd letter. Caesar writes to Labienus, another one of his legates. If, and then we get this moment here, this is the indirect command. There's no ut, and this cum is cum a preposition, not cum a clause marker. There is an ut missing here to get us into the indirect command. It's just understood. How do we understand that? Well, we see the subjunctive here, and we know that Caesar is writing people with orders. So ut is very often in Latin suppressed by the authors, by writers, when it's simple enough to understand. So the command to Labienus is that he should come with his legion to the territory of the Nervii, and he should do this, this is Caesar just being a little bit fancy, if he were able to do something, we would say, for the good, commodo, of the Republic. All right, re publicae. Now, I said of the Republic, but this re publicae is actually a dative It is a dative of interest with commodo, the dative of purpose, in a double dative construction. Does that mean, fun moment here, does that mean that re publicae can't be genitive? No, it absolutely could be genitive.
No way! Yes way!
If you read re publicae as genitive, that's fine for the well-being of the Republic. It's just possible that re publicae is also dative, which would work if this were a double dative construction. Can we tell the difference? No, we can't. So it's up to you to decide how you want to interpret this phrase. Okay, so here we come to the end, and when Caesar moves, he moves fast. The remaining part of the army, yes, what about the rest of the army? Well, because it was, that is to say, the rest of the army, was further away by a little, another ablative degree of difference with a comparative adverb. All right? Because the rest of the army was a little further away than these three men that Caesar wrote letters to, Crassus, Fabius, and Labienus, Caesar, he's been the subject since he started, Caesar did not think that, so that's why now we see why reliquam partem is indicated as a subject despite being accusative, and expectandam, the gerundive, is clearly missing an essay for another passive periphrastic construction. Caesar did not think that the rest of the army, because it was further away, should be waited for. All right, and again, sibi is understood as the dative of agent that's missing by him. He was not going to wait for the rest of the army. Instead, again, no connector, just some asyndeton again. Caesar's moving very fast. He gathers horses, cavalry, all right, around 400 from the nearby camps. And yes, this is a small oversight right here. Quadringentos is, in fact, the accusative adjective that is modifying equites, and therefore should also be indicated in blue since it is modifying this noun equites. All right, and with that, we have finished chapters 45 and 46. Caesar now, a key development, is aware of the situation that Cicero is facing and is taking steps, very, very swift steps, to address the situation and to come to Cicero's aid. And we will see how all of that plays out in the final two chapters of Caesar Book 5. Maximus gratias and vale te omnes.